Afternoon, Gdansk. Lovely to be here. So what are we going to talk about today? Why is there a designer in the room at a technical conference? Well, hopefully all will be explained. A little bit about myself first. So this is my career. I like to visualize things. That's what designers do. But you can see that there's been some fairly lots of blue, which is good, lots of ups, but quite a few downs in my career as well. The first big one in the middle there is a dot-com crash, when my software company also crashed. So I learned a lot. All of the peaks are either getting married or having children, and then more recently the financial crisis, and then right at the end there leads you into the story of why I'm at EPAM. So I had was the founder of a design agency called Great Fridays. We were acquired by EPAM 2014, and so that was a pretty good day for me for lots of reasons. But really, we've been working extremely hard within EPAM over the last 18 months to harmonize design and engineering, right? So I've been in the industry. I'm an industrial designer. That's my background. That's what I was classically trained to do. And historically, design and engineering have always or never necessarily worked particularly well together. So, a design agency becoming part of a very large technical organization was somewhat of a challenge that I was very excited to be a part of. So the first thing I'd like to do is just, dispel a few misconceptions about design. So the perception in the world of software engineering, that I knew this anyway, but certainly I hear it time and time again, is design, that's just UX, right? But that's not true. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll see that actually design and engineering come together in many different ways. So we're trying to change the perception of design in an engineering software space. We're developing devices, connected devices through IoT. I'll show you some examples of those. Also, we're using design for process, so working very closely with large organizations to help them to be much better at their internal processes. And again, I'll show you some of the case studies that we have. So in Poland and also several of other locations around the world, we have a very similar methodology, invent, fail fast, learn, and deliver. And design really is part of a problem-solving mix. So we have lots of designers from different backgrounds, industrial design, who work with our embedded teams, obviously UX, experience design, concept called service design really as well, that also within that team. But the most important thing is that we're very much a part of a much bigger team. So we work in small groups across EPAM in an R&D capacity. So we have something called the garage, which I'll talk about, but also live on clients. And I'm looking forward to showing you some of those as well. So I guess these are the four key areas that we're seeing today, right? So where does design fit? We have technology, platforms, solutions. Doesn't really matter what they are. But the client is really evolving their infrastructure now to cope with the demands. Everything that we do in our design team is really driven by data and insight. So there's a huge amount of data now that's available that really helps us make much more informed and better decisions. And because we're making decisions, and because we're very focused on humans, which is really my specialism, we're really able to change organizations so sufficiently or so radically that we're disrupting them, and we need to really start to think about how the merging of all of these skills comes together to remodel business. So we also have business consultants within our team. So that seems quite strange, right? A technology business with design consultancy, data and insight, of course, data science, but business, why is that important? We also play around with different methodologies as well. So Agile, very very familiar with all of you, I'm sure. Design thinking, which is really my strong point. But then we're also looking at other methodologies, and we're really throwing them together, and trying to innovate methodology as well as product and services. Something else you may or may not be familiar with, which is this concept of TRIZ, which is a very well, let's say, I think it's about 50, 60-year-old methodology, which is kind of this continual innovation methodology. Just show you a short video, because we throw all of those things together in this concept called the garage, which is a little bit playful. It is also something that we do commercially as well. So I'll just show you this video. I had to break out to the web, excuse me. So you might say, okay, that's fine. You know, EPAM, bringing together multiple disciplines and experimenting, you know, good R&D. You know, what does that mean for our customers? And, you know, you'll hear me talk really about human beings a lot. And our process is the same. Right at the beginning, I talked about, you know, we develop UX, UI, of course, but also physical products. And I'll show you some of the scale of the physical products that we do create. But, you know, we also start with human beings, and the same principles are the same throughout our process. So they're from different cultures. Just to illustrate that, you know, this is my family. So my wife, I have 4 children. That's why I travel a lot, by the way. So, hey, don't tell my wife. Oops, I'm on video, sorry. But this is Samuel, Jacob, Rosie, Bess, and Maddie. And just to illustrate, this is Samuel, it's my oldest child. He has a mobile phone, he has an iPhone 5. He has a PlayStation 4, and he plays rugby. But now he has a credit card. He's 12, and he has an app that he manages his money. So he's building up a very certain type of human behavior, which is very different than Sam, who's based in South Africa, which is also very different than Sam, who's based in China. So there's a very complex world out there of human beings that have very different, you know, psychological influences in their life. But there'll be some things that we can really focus on. So when building, you know, products for humans, we need to understand emotionally how they interact with both technology and the environment around them and their emotions and triggers. So that process we use on a day-to-day basis. You know, you'll have heard of personas and so on, but we spend a lot of time, you know, using data that's available, using analytics from the web, using observational data that we can go in and observe humans and really try and build up a picture before we launch into, you know, a development cycle. This is an example where we would look at each of those individuals and really start to understand, you know, this is an example of a big banking project that I'll talk about as a case study in a short while. But, you know, we really need to understand not only their psychology and what their triggers and life goals are, but which devices do they live in, you know, which digital services do they use, and so on and so forth. So really understanding them, and then we map them out. So you've seen user journeys, right? I'm not here to talk about UX and user journeys, but it's important to show that actually it doesn't matter what channel we're engaging with the customer, we're still following a very human-centered process. So, you know, why do customers care? Well, what we're trying to do really is make sure that we're delivering the right product at the right time. And the right product doesn't have to be a digital product. The right product could be, you know, a physical device that sits on the wall. But our process really helps our customers to understand exactly, you know, the right product and the right service for our customers. And as I said, it's a very diverse, you know, challenge now because, you know, these are digital devices. Obviously, we're very familiar with those, but very often we find that our clients, and we work with majority of the time, fairly senior C-level stakeholders, you know, the digital service may be amazing, but actually where the service for the customer may fall down is the service desks themselves or the call center, or maybe there's an opportunity to create hardware devices. So, you know, the actual, the complexity of the world that we live in is changed significantly. And so I thought as case studies, I'd start with something that actually, you know, would really dispel the myth in terms of how we're using design and how we're bringing engineering together in some of these garages, but in real-life scenarios. And it's not just interaction with screens. So this is a project that we're working on at the moment, which is really, we were approached to build the future of transportation from the ground up, right? So how does design fit into that? How does embedded software, how does software and infrastructure and platform support this? So, you know, obviously, this is a real project, by the way, so this is something that we're launching next year, and we've been very lucky to design a whole ecosystem of transportation from the ground up. But obviously, there's the obvious part of a vehicle that requires, you know, design thinking, which is the dashboard. And I've just got a very short video of that here as well. So we're working on automotive solutions using software now. This was amazing, by the way. So the client had actually converted their DB4, so they got an Aston Martin DB4, which we converted into clean tech energy. So remove the engine, replace it with batteries. Some would say that's sacrilege. But you know, this is a great project to start to work on and think about, you know, how we bring these things together. And obviously within the teams where we bring them together, I talk about mixed disciplines a lot. If you're going to design a bus that has, you know, not only aesthetically looks beautiful, but also you need to have engineers that are mechanical engineers as well as software engineers. So, you know, we brought disciplines together to design the chassis from the ground up, as well as the battery units and the gear units and so on and so forth. You know, internally, how does the environment work? You know, it needs to be ergonomically correct. Even the steering wheels, you know, so this is design. Okay, this is UX, but actually our role was very different. We need to make sure that, you know, the panels on there work extremely well and obviously connect to the system that supports this piece of transport. This is interesting. So this was a project that came out of our Minsk garage, and we were playing around with basic telemetry and stress detection for drivers of transport, any transport really, trains, buses, airplanes. And this example, which has actually found its way from an R&D environment into a real project, is where we can actually connect the driver to the transport, to the bus in this particular instance, and find out patterns of where they're stressed along the journey. And we can even understand whether they're tired before they, you know, if they haven't had much sleep. So, you know, really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with software and creating, you know, brand new dashboards that it becomes part of this transportation ecosystem. We've now moved on to designing trucks and also delivery vehicles. So working very closely to think about the future of delivery vehicles, both driver-based delivery vehicles and driverless delivery vehicles. You know, so think about the infrastructure, the software infrastructure required to power a delivery vehicle. You know, we still start with human beings. We still have to understand how they're going to use the vehicle, and we still talk with customers and think about how they want to receive deliveries in this particular case. So, you know, we've started to look at how we can create the next generation of driverless vehicles, where, you know, let's say, for instance, I have an RFID bracelet. I work for one of the big delivery companies in the world. And as I walk down the road to deliver the parcels, the vehicle follows me, rather than me having to go back to the vehicle every time. So, you know, some really cool, interesting things that are happening live, you know, where we're bringing together these disciplines, you know, where software engineering isn't just about the digital part, it's about so much more. Another example, I'll skim over this because I've got one eye on the time as well. Thought I had 30 minutes, I've got 25, so you can forgive me. Which again, we're trying to look at how we can build product. This was one for Vodafone, which we launched in Italy and Germany and in the UK. And really, it's a cycle tracking, that's it. But the process was very similar to get there. So the end product was this. It was a digital application. It was a device that you could lock into your bicycle or your moped and track it and obviously you know where it is. So it's not, again, it's not new technology, but something that was very successful in the market. We went through a very iterative, agile process. So we had, in our mixed disciplines, we had software engineers, we had front-end devs in terms of the mobile capabilities, so iOS and also Android. But we had the industrial designers, and we were able to start with a client, workshopping ideation, saying, okay, what is the future service for this particular client, which was Vodafone. But then 3 months later, we had 120 of these prototypes here that we also built in the market, being tested and validated against real humans to gather feedback. So, when you're talking about an agile process, it can be applied to physical product as well as it can to technology. So I think that's a really nice example. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about other areas where we're working to, really push, the harmonization of design and engineering. This one, where our task was really to remove around about £207 million worth of efficiencies from another big telecom business, right? Well, how do you do that? And the first thing we did is we looked at the available data, we looked at the observational data, we looked at web analytics, and we spent a lot of time mapping out what we call the current state. So our role was really to move, how do you save £207 million over a 10-year period? And most of that money was being spent in call centers in India, so the challenge for us was to move large amounts of calls from the call centers into their self-serve channels, so into their digital channels, around about 500,000 per month, so a fairly big challenge. So what we did is we looked at the data, and we were able to map out, again, current state journeys of customers across all of those channels. And those channels didn't necessarily have to be digital. In this case, this is Mary, who she just wanted to buy a phone so she could use Skype to talk to her grandchildren who'd emigrated. And we observed her. And there's this particular point here, you can see there's lots of red on there. And that red signifies, her frustration. She'd walked into a retail environment. She'd asked the store manager for some help. He couldn't help her, so he put her onto a digital kiosk in the corner of the store. And he asked, he stood over her while she was looking. They couldn't find the data on there. So they basically called customer services. And while the customer manager was on customer services, Mary was sitting on the kiosk, and web chat popped up and said, hey, can I help you? So there was 4 channels there that were working completely broken. So we did this with all of their customers and different customer scenarios. And here's a few examples where we're really trying to understand what's broken so we can fix it. And the outcome was this one example here where we actually, the outcome of the products that we delivered was a much better desktop environment for their agents. We also developed a much better content strategy and digital strategy for their digital channels. So you can see that how we've used design there isn't necessarily UX, if I go back. What we're trying to do is really help senior people within large organizations like O2 understand what's happening, right? And that's a good example of that. So one other thing I thought, so not only are we using design to think about, what's broken and how can we then fix that, using our software ability, but also we wanted to really think about how we could help our clients to envision the future. So this is a nice case study that we've been working on in the last 18 months with a large bank. And, this is a really great example of how we've started to harmonize, this kind of thinking with engineering. So the outcome here was to say, okay, we feel that banks are slightly confused about, the future. They don't really understand how technology is going to impact. This particular project was specifically about wealth. So how could we make an experience for banks better? And how do things like, robo-advisor, how do things like, chat bots, those kind of things, how are they going to ultimately influence the way in which somebody with an investment interacts with their bank, okay? But we also needed to make sure that, that the important thing there is we could be very aspirational and say this is what we think is going to happen, but we also needed to make sure that it was technically possible. So we went through a very similar process that I've talked about, very human-led process. We interviewed customers in all over the world, so in Europe, in China, in North America, really started to understand their differences, back to my point earlier. And from that, we were able to define some of these customer life cycles, right? And again, this is, when we talk about harmonizing design engineering or human-led engineering, what you would have got prior to that, you would have had an agency who would develop a customer journey across the top. So this is one of the investors that's about to engage with the bank. You'll see on the top left, although it's not that clear, so I'll explain it, is that this particular human being has sold their business for 90 million Hong Kong dollars. Lucky them. And through the process, they then say, okay, how am I going to invest my money? So they go and see the bank. And so we're following them through a series of life steps from when they sell their business to their father dying there. So that gives a very different perspective on their life, all the way through to their daughter being born. So we map out these aspirational journeys, and there were several of these. But the key thing then is, okay, what does that mean for technology, right? How do we take this and actually turn that into a technology roadmap? So you'll see a very faint line, maybe 2/3 up the screen there. That's what we call a line of visibility. Everything under that line is how that interaction between an investor and the bank, how that then filters down into the organization and ultimately affects everything that is going to enable that interaction to happen. So we'll see that there's a line in there that talks about how the advisor goes into the bank to talk to other human beings within the bank, the infrastructure required to be able to support that, the platforms to support that, and also the competencies required to support that. So what we're effectively doing is we understand the customer based on all of the data and the human work that we do, but then we're able to create a gap analysis and say, okay, well, if we're really going to achieve this vision, how can we deliver that? And this is really one of the tools that we've developed. The other thing, across the bottom, you'll see lots of lists. Something else I did mention, that obviously we were keen to look at what the vision for banking is. So we took that customer feedback or that user feedback, and we wanted to basically turn that into something that was absolutely real, that the bank that we were working with could really visualize the impact that that would have on their organization. And we split that into 3 distinct bits. So in there's customer feedback that says, actually, I would like to talk to my advisor over Skype. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. But there were other much bigger ideas that we captured whilst doing these customer interviews and customer feedback loops. So the output of those was we wanted to create, from all of that, as well as having a technology human-driven roadmap and gap analysis, really working with clients to help them to understand, what is the future of wealth management. So again, another short video to show you. So all of these functions were basically captured from that user feedback that we had. And then we brought them together. These guys are all in my team, actually, so they're not actors. Jeremy, sitting on his lovely chair there, is actually my head of industrial design. He's got a very nice house. So you can see, I won't let that play out because I'm looking at the time down here. So you can see that we can use design, obviously, very practically on digital UX. Yes, of course we can. But also design to really drive forward IoT and working very closely with engineering groups and with business groups and with data analysts, to really bring those disciplines together. And then also, as a strategic tool, where we've been able to really disrupt organizations such as large banks and retailers to get them to really think about the future of their organization. Okay, that's one thing, but more importantly, how we can use technology to get there. So really influencing that decision. Just to finish on, this was a quote from around 3 years ago, so I was very lucky to meet Brian Chesky in San Francisco. And, I think it just shows the importance of what design means now in this collaborative environment. So thank you. There's one thing before I finish. If you are using the Huntley app, so on the EPAM stand, if you've downloaded that, if you use the password Go Agile, you'll get lots more bonus points and all sorts of good stuff. So thank you very much. I hope I've changed your perception of design a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, very much. Unfortunately, there are no questions. So please give a round of applause for Matt once again. Thank you very much.
No problem. Shall I unplug this?